Because we keep hearing these kind of, oh yes, well the first quarter we're in trouble, but the second quarter is all going to be okay. There'll still be over 1 million vaccines arriving into the country per month in April, May and June. Why is it likely that it's going to be any better in the second quarter when the first quarter has been so fraught with difficulty?
Well, I suppose that the teething troubles would be ironed out, and the plan always was that, the companies were not going to have 1 billion doses of their vaccine sitting on their shelf in anticipation that they were going to get approval, because that would have been, poor business model. Having said that, some of them did have vials of vaccine, but not hundreds of millions, maybe 10 millions, ready by the time the regulatory agencies had approved them. So once the regulatory agencies approved them, then they put in place a cranking up of the production, and that's why it's taken them a few months to get to the level that they need to get to meet the commitments in terms of some of them have not meeting the commitments. Yes. Unfortunately, that's an issue.
We can still have a little bit of hope, though, about the second quarter.
Yeah, and the other sort of positive news is that we're not going to be relying solely on the 3 or 4 vaccine manufacturing vaccines that are currently. Well, we hope tomorrow that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine will be licensed by the EMA. It'd be very surprising if it's not, given that the FDA have already approved it. So I'd expect the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to be licensed tomorrow by the EMA. So we'd have 3 tomorrow, but there are 3 others. There's the one from North America, the Novavax from the US, the CureVac from Germany, and also the Sputnik vaccine from Russia.
I'm really glad you mentioned the Sputnik vaccine, because I wanted to ask you about that. They have come out, the makers of it, and they have questioned the EMA's neutrality, because the EMA have not, I suppose, made any kind of positive overtures towards the Sputnik vaccine. It looks, I'm sure no more than yourself, I've read the data and things like the Lancet. It looks like a really good vaccine. Why is the EU dragging their heels on the Sputnik vaccine?
First of all, I agree completely with you. It looks great. The efficacy in that Lancet paper showed 92%. That's ahead of the other 2 adenovirus vectors. The EU are not dragging their heels, to be fair. What's happened is that the EU are currently doing a rolling review, which is the way that they do all of these. So they're looking at the data, and they haven't yet had an application for a full market authorization yet from the Gamel Institute in Moscow, but they expect to get that soon. What happened was that countries like Hungary, Slovakia, and Montenegro started negotiating directly with the Russians to regulate these vaccines. In fact, Hungary have already given emergency use authorization. And of course, they're allowed to do that because it's emergency use, but it's frowned on by the EMA, and that was what happened. One of the EMA regulators made a comment suggesting that these countries shouldn't be doing this because they were playing Russian roulette, they actually said. So that then annoyed the Russians, and the Russians were accusing the EMA of sort of bias against the Russian vaccine. But to be honest, that's a bit of a political thing, and that vaccine will be looked at by the EMA, and I'd be very surprised if it's not licensed as well. And it's a very, very good vaccine. So that will be another one that will.
Yes, and fingers crossed we get that too. Can I ask you one last question? We're currently being told that there was 224,000 confirmed cases of COVID here. So conservatively, you might think we've had at least 500,000 people with infections. We're on over 300,000, nearly 400,000 people have had at least 1 dose of a vaccine. That's around, I'm rounding up here clearly, but it's around 1 million people have either had 1 dose of a vaccine or have had an infection. So they probably have partial immunity to some extent at this point anyway. That's a 20% of our population. How soon, Kingston, are we likely to see some kind of tipping point in terms of cases as that, I'm not talking about herd immunity, but that reservoir of immunity among the community acts as a buffer and slows this thing down, do you think?
That's a very good point. For sure. I mean, I would agree with you. I think that probably I would even put the figure as higher than that.
So would I. I was trying to be conservative, to be honest.
Be conservative, that's fine. But yeah, I agree. So what it'll mean is that the number of deaths will go right down because the 95% of the deaths are the over 65s, and once we have the over 65s all vaccinated or have immunity through infection, then the death rate should reduce from 95 to 5% of what it was. The number of hospitalizations will also reduce, but the hospitalizations still can occur in the younger population. About 60% are in the older population, but 40% of the hospitalizations are in younger people. Not so many of those end up dying from the infection, but they could be hospitalized. So it'll be a little bit longer before you see halving perhaps of hospitalization, but you won't, assuming there was the same spread of the virus, which there isn't, and that's now declining, which is great news. But once the economy opens stop, the spread could resurrect. And remembering that most of the transmission now is in the younger population.
Yes.
And we're not planning to immunise those until the last cohort, although that's been looked at.
And those new variants, like the 6 cases of the Brazilian
variant,
obviously
we could see issues with the variants.
Okay.
Although there's data coming out now suggesting that, two things. One, that the current vaccines are able to take care of it, not quite as well, but they're able to protect against the variants. And in any case, the companies are making new versions of these vaccines. It will take a while for them to be ready.
Thank you
boosters.
very much for speaking to us this morning, Kingston. That is Kingston Mills, there, Professor of Experimental Immunology at Trinity College in Dublin.